Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to completely assemble one of our new Hinge FLE frames. These are the fastest hinge frame I believe ever made. We've had a lot of fantastic feedback from customers. We don't typically recommend you take it apart completely, but some people wanting to do custom anodizing, because we do provide the frames in raw, or if you get shot in it and you really need to do a thorough cleaning, you may need to take the frame apart. And in which case you can use this video to help you put it all back together. A few products that I'm a big fan of and that we like to use to do this: Outlast oil, premium gun oil, Vibrotite VC3, and Vibrotite 125. We sell all of these products. I highly recommend them. This is the best lubricant you can buy for paintball. This is for any screw that you may need to adjust back and forth, but you don't want to come loose. And this is a thread locker for locking screws into place that you don't want to back out and fall out. Okay, so to start off, we have our frame. And we're going to start by taking the trigger return spring and the trigger return spring guide. Now on one side of the trigger return spring guide, you're going to see a little pip, which is from the injection molding process. You're going to want that to face the top. The smooth side you're going to want to face down inside the frame. So it's just going to drop inside the frame like so. Yeah, so you can see that. You're going to want to make sure that the spring guide is down completely and pushed right back as well. Down completely and pushed right back. Then we're going to take the trigger plate. Now, all of our frames come with both trigger plates, so you can use them with WGP based guns, or you can use them with Empire Resurrections. With the WGP based gun, the timing rod hole is lower down. With a trigger plate for a Empire gun, the timing rod hole is further up. That is the only difference in how the frames are built, and you can swap the trigger plate back and forth and you can put the frame onto any gun you like. All frames come with both trigger plates now. If you bought one of our first run frames where they only came in WGP or Empire version and you do want to swap it over, just send us a copy of your receipt and we will send you out a replacement, or not a replacement, but we'll send you out the other version of trigger plate. So we're going to drop the trigger plate in the frame from the top. You're going to see it sits up on top of the spring. You're going to want to get in here with a little Allen key, push the spring back, compressing it slightly so it goes below the shoulder. Take the Allen key out, and the trigger plate should drop down further. You might have to push it down slightly so it is below the top of the frame. And now the slots in the trigger plate will line up with these two holes. Keeping the trigger plate in, holding it in with your fingers, you're going to want to take your shoulder bolts. Now, there was on some of our early frames two different heights of shoulder bolts. So the shoulder here was higher on some and lower on other shoulders, on other shoulder bolts. You're going to want to use the two with the low height shoulder bolts for the front two screws and the two with the high shoulders for the rear two screws. On all the frames we're building now, they're all just exactly the same height, so you can use any shoulder bolt in any location. You're going to take a tiny amount of blue Loctite on the threads of the shoulder bolt. You're going to put the first one through the frame, through the trigger plate, and then you're going to just screw that down into place. Snug it up just gently. Going to take the second one. Again, a tiny amount of blue Loctite on the threads and into the rear hole through the trigger plate. Screw that down and just snug it up slightly. Okay, so your trigger plate's in place. You're going to check that your rear spring guide is down all the way. Everything looks good. Now we do come with two different Sear springs when you buy the frame, and we do sell Sear springs separately. This is our light medium Sear spring. This is the one we recommend and which comes stock in all of our frames now. That is going to drop into the back hole. The trigger return spring in here is actually Comes as standard with our medium return spring. We do have a lighter one and we have a heavier one depending on how you like your trigger setup. So now the roller sear is going to drop down, line the hole up. It's going to be on the spring. Again, a tiny amount of blue Loctite on the threads. Through the shoulder. The shoulder bolt goes through the frame and the sear and just snug it up slightly. All right, I'm going to check that the sear moving nice and smoothly and freely and looking good. Okay, so next up we're going to put the safety in. The safety always comes through from the right hand side of the frame. Lines up just before the hole that the spring goes in. We drop the spring down into the frame so it drops into that hole. He says trying to get it to line up. Okay, so it's in that hole. And the ball detent is going to come through the hole in the top of the frame and sit down on top of the spring, like so. I'm going to cover the hole up. I'm going to put our Allen key through the top, push down on the ball detent so it compresses into the hole. Push the safety from the back side and have it come across and snap into place. Check that it slides and snaps back and forth, and that is a safety in place. Now typically when I do it, I keep my finger over this hole to make sure that if I screw up the ball detent and the spring doesn't fly out. I only have my finger off of there just to show it for the camera. Okay, so safety's in. Now we're going to do the trigger. Now the trigger, we have two special screws. These are oval tipped set screws which push on the trigger plate, and these could provide the different leverage ratios. Now all frames being built now come with two screws in place. This lower one is backed out so it's not actually active, and we're only using the middle one. We recommend only using one screw at a time. You can actually set up the trigger with different changes in lever ratio as you pull it by having the screws engage at different points, but typically we recommend just using that middle one. You can use the top location. The trigger pull is light, very, very light, a little bit longer. This is medium trigger pull weight, a little bit longer. And this one is the shortest trigger pull, but a little bit heavier. Even on this setting, it is still lighter than any trigger pull on any other hinge frame that's been made before this because of the way the lever ratio works to activate the frame itself. We have two precision bearings on either side of the trigger, and that's one of the things that makes the trigger pull so phenomenally fast on these frames. And I do recommend a tiny drop of Outlast oil in each of those bearings to make sure they're always going to perform at their best. Okay, so this is the trickier part of doing the frame. And what's going to happen is we're going to put the frame in the trigger into place and the frame, line those holes up, and we have two precision shims. You can see them up here. Now we need to have one of these on either side of the trigger in order to allow us to tighten the trigger and those bearings to work perfectly, which is part of what gives us the speed of the frame. So it's very important that we have both of these shims, and this shim is going to go in between the trigger. Hopefully you can see it there. I put it between the trigger and the frame, and I'm going to pull it over and line it up with the hole. Need to get everything to line up well. Then we're going to take a shoulder bolt and put it into that hole and have it line up and move down. Now you don't want it to go all the way in because we're going to have to put a shim on the other side. So now I've turned the frame over and I'm actually going to have to push that shoulder bolt back just slightly to allow me to get a shim in on this side. I like to use these thin tweezers for this. And a shim goes in on this side, gets pushed over. Hopefully you can see me doing this. And then through the inside of that hole, you need to make sure that that shim has lined up perfectly with the shoulder bolt. And then push the shoulder bolt up and tighten it into place. And just snug it down lightly. Now it is crucial to have both of those shims. So now there is no side-to-side play in the trigger. It is super fast, super smooth, and this is one of the things that really makes this frame rip. Okay, and the last things we need to do, the rear trigger stop. The set screw in this rear trigger stop is what allows you to adjust the rear trigger travel. And that is going to go up into the frame from the right hand side. And you're going to want the flap to be vertical, and you pull the trigger and it's going to come vertical. Hopefully you can see that. Now you need to hold the trigger so that that stays vertical and it stops the rear trigger stop from rotating. You put the washer, you put a little bit of blue Loctite on the next screw, put it into place, still holding the trigger, and then you're going to snug that down. And that's your rear trigger stop in place. We do have a front trigger stop. On these frames, we've actually found it better to control the front stop with the set screw in the trigger rather than the front screw. So the threads are still there, we still provide the screw, but we don't install it and we don't recommend you use it. You know, this is Autocockers, people like to do things however they like to do them, so it's still there as an option. But we actually control the front part of the pull with the activation set screw in here. We find that gives you the fastest, best response possible. Only thing left to do, put the rubber grips on, and a little bit of blue Loctite on each of the rubber grip screws, and tighten them all up. And there you go, fully rebuilt hinge frame. Thanks for watching.